Want to give a shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I'm done. I just finished up reading Waybound, which is book number 12 from Cradle. This is by Will Wight. And I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was just right now. So I'm going to give this one 2 stars. I liked a couple things about it, but yeah, this was hard. I didn't like this book. I'm really sad about this, that I didn't like this book. I wanted to like this book so bad. I mean, I find myself considering myself a huge Cradle fan and a Will Wight fan. And so much so that when I made a video earlier on in this year, in January, that was my top 10 most anticipated fantasy books coming out in 2023, Waybound was number 1. And for a number of reasons. Firstly, I have just loved this series. I've loved it so much. Going up into the last couple books of this series, I considered this series to be one of my top 5 all-time fantasy series. And I've promoted this so much. I mean, I think more than any other series. Maybe The Wandering Inn more so, but I've had more people tell me that my videos have influenced them into picking up this series. I mean, dozens and dozens of people have reached out to me and told me how much this series means to them, how much they're thankful that they got into this because of my videos. And so I find myself feeling like an ambassador for this series and promoting this series. So to go out of that, and to go into what I view as the most disappointing finale that I've ever read for a fantasy series is I feel very sad about it. And so, I hope that you're not watching this being like, oh, there Matt goes again. It's another popular book, and he's going to rag all over it because that gets him views. I mean, this sort of thing does not help me. This sort of video will end up getting me negative subscribers. And it's not good for my channel to do this kind of thing. And so, yeah, I would love more than anything to be able to give a glowing review to this. But I have made a promise to myself, more than anything, more than I've made a promise to you. I promised myself that I would always stay true to never being influenced by outside forces, whether that be, publishers sending me books, whether that be trying to fall for the hype machine that I think goes into a lot of these popular books that is really easy to fall into, and something that I've fallen into a lot before I started a video channel. And I just promised myself that I'd always just be honest about my opinions, and that's what I have to do here. So I recognize that this opinion is going to be wildly unpopular, and so much so that as I looked on this series, as I was getting near the end, realizing that I just don't like this book and it's not going to recover, I looked at Goodreads, and there's literally only 2 people that have reviews of this series that are a 1 or a 2, and I'm one of them. And literally 0 people have rated this under a 4 on Amazon out of like over 1,000 people. So yeah, this is probably the most unpopular book review that I've ever had to do. But I just had so many problems with this, and it's hard to even figure out where I start with my problems. And I'm not going to make any spoilers here, but I think ultimately my biggest problem is the tension. It just lacked tension, and tension is not needed for a book to be great. See Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, which did have some tension in it, but this was a series about characters and character development and character growth. Character development and growth, same thing. But, so it doesn't, and I love that series. That remains, a top 5 fantasy series for me. But in a series like Cradle, that for me is, on its foundation, relies on tension to make it a wonderful book. In a wonderful series, that when it lacks that, it ruins the reading experience. Because, Cradle, while I overall, as I look on Cradle, I still very much like the series. I just don't really like the ending and how the last couple books wrapped things up, especially this last one. But, I say this with a lot of love, but Cradle's never had, in my opinion, great characters. It's never had, this amazing, just writing style. It's excelled on having a wonderful world and a cool magic system, and a really fun, engaging plot that left me on the edge of my seat for a lot of the reading experience. And with that gone, I was left with very little to find enjoyment in. And so one of the reasons I think that the tension is gone from this is that the characters are so overpowered. So overpowered. Now, I recognize that this is partially a me problem and not so much this book. Although I will, say that I do think some of it is the book. But I am that kind of person that doesn't love it when things get overpowered. I'm a big video game nerd. Always have been, and I suspect that I always will be. Especially now with kids. It's awesome. They're getting into games that I used to play as a kid, and we get to play together, and it's awesome. But I don't like it when my character gets too strong, and it sucks me out of that world. I'm a big player of Paradox games, like Crusader Kings, and I like it when I'm trying to get bigger and better. But when I become the emperor, I usually just restart the game because it's like, okay, the tension's gone, and that's what happened here. Now, I also recognize that this is a little foundational to the progression fantasy genre, which at its heart Cradle is. In fact, I think Cradle's probably the most famous progression fantasy out there. And by progression fantasy, what I mean is kind of video gamey, where characters get stronger and stronger on kind of a linear path. So they start off as a 0 and they end up greater than a hero, godlike powers. And I've read some that have stuck the landing very well. And I think of Mother of Learning is one that I thought really did a good job at keeping that tension throughout. And so it didn't feel too overpowered. It just kind of rode that line throughout. But in this one, I just no longer have any fear of anything going wrong for these characters, because they're just stronger than everybody else. And the main character, especially the main character, Lyndon, can just do whatever he wants. And I have no fear of anything going bad. I also feel like, and I'll try to figure out a best way to explain this, but I think one of the core things about the series that I've enjoyed is this loop that has kept me addicted. And that loop is, character in the book is told very early on in each of these books what they should be able to relatively expect to achieve. And they will never be able to achieve more than that. So in the first book, extremely minor spoilers, but within the first few pages, you find out that this main character, Lyndon, will never be able to reach to this level, let alone go past it. And if you've ever read a fantasy book, clearly you know that he's going to get to that level. And when he gets there, and when he gets beyond that, as a reader, it's like this dopamine hit. You're excited, it's fun. And every one of those books had that. Not this one, though. In this one, the character reaches this peak, and you know that the character is going to reach this peak. And there's nowhere left to go. So it took away that enjoyment from that constant progression thing that I'm looking for. Now, I recognize that there is fundamentally here a progression thing that happens, and without ruining anything, it involves the title of this book. But you knew it was going to happen. And from the beginning of this book, the character was defeating and going up against the same kind of enemies that the character has already gone up and already defeated in previous books. And that just didn't feel fun or fresh or stressful. I want to be stressed out during these books. Also, there was this expectation that was set in book 1 that was never reached. And it made it feel like this book wasn't a finale. It felt like we're halfway through the series. And you finish this book, and you should be feeling like, okay, we made it. We're done. But what left me feeling was, okay, yeah, but there's a way bigger problem out there that has yet to be solved. And it's not like a lot of great fantasy series where they'll finish and they'll say at the end, after you're done, after you've had the tension, you go, okay, now there's this new problem that we have to go get. Usually that's the next book. But in this one, you already knew about this problem. You've known about this problem since the very beginning of this story. And for us not to be able to try to solve that problem, but being teased throughout every single book that we will eventually get there and we will eventually try to solve that problem. It felt like there was this promise that was made to the reader that never got realized. And it ultimately made me feel like I don't understand the point of this other side story that we kept having flashbacks to, or not flashbacks, but cutting to. Why? Why did we waste the space to go over this story that was ultimately a little bit irrelevant to the plot if we never really got to the meat of it? Now, I recognize that without the author saying this, there is very clearly going to be another series, probably called Abaddon, or however you say it, that then has another 10-book or so series that deals with that problem. Cool. It didn't need to be another series, though. It should just be Cradle. It should just be, book number 13 in Cradle. And it would have made me so much happier as a reader to not have those expectations be shattered with supposedly a finale of a book. The pacing in this book. The pacing of this book was way, way off. Way off. Not just for what I consider to be a good fantasy book, but to what the other books had established. The beginning stages of this book, and then later on, were just very boring sequences of extended training montages. Now, I had this problem in the previous book, and it was even worse here. We're way, way past the point of that being interesting. And as I talked with other people, even those that liked this book, they would say the same thing. I'm like, why are we doing this right now? Why are we continuing to have more pages devoted to train? It's not as fun, especially when the goal of the training is training other people to get up to the level that the main character is. It just, it loses the fun. Then this book moved way too quickly. We went from major fight to major fight to major fight to major fight. But these characters were already just so overpowered that it just felt off. I mean, we're fighting the same kind of characters that we've already fought in the past. So that progression wasn't there. And it just kind of went off too sudden. Way too fast at the end of this. I've also heard this complaint from people that like this book. This book should have been split into 3 or 4 different books and fleshed this out more, fleshed out these storylines instead of just snipping and snapping from one major action sequence to the next. And it kind of ruined any sort of climactic feeling that you would expect out of a book like this. So we went halfway through the book before the pace really picks up. Well, I recognize that there are some things that have pace to it, but around that halfway mark is when the pace picks up. And then we get an entire book filled with 25% of this book. And then we basically get this extended ending for 25% that was not a real ending. So yeah, pacing, very strange choice here. There was also way too many little plot points that didn't add up for me. Now, I'm mentioning this later on in this video because very well somebody could be watching this being like, yeah, there were no prop problems here. And if we talked about it, I'm probably the one missing something here. But even if that's the case, should this been explained a little bit better so that I understood why these plot points were what they were? Because things didn't add up. They didn't feel earned. And I can't talk about the specifics of them for fear of spoiling things. But if you want to know specifics, a great place to do that would be to come join my Discord and talk to me there. And I'd be happy to chat full spoilers with you so we can go over these things. But in the comments is not really here the great place to do it because we can't spoiler tag anything. And I don't want to ruin anything for people because I think a lot of people are going to be watching this that haven't read this book yet. So finally, there is a character missing here from this book that has now been missing for a little while that I absolutely loved. It was my favorite character in the series. And ultimately, it kind of soured my reading experience here on this series as a whole. I love this character. And the shock of losing this character, and I'm not going to say more than that about why we lost this character or who it is, it made it not as fun. Now, I loved the experience of losing this character, because it shocked me. It's the only thing in the series that really did shock me. And it would have been so much better if that shock would have happened at the end, so that I would have got to experience this character more, because I think it was wasted. I think it didn't make sense. We lost that character. Cool. There's a reason for it. But ultimately, I don't think there was a reason for it. And if there was, it didn't have to happen then. And so you ultimately deprived me of my favorite part of this series for 2 full books, and that's disappointing. So at the end of the day, I feel very soured on my reading experience here for the series as a whole. And while I am still very happy that I read this series, and I will recommend this series to people, I just feel like what could have been an all-time great is now relegated from great to good, and that's sad for me. So also, take this review with a grain of salt, because I am going to be on the extreme minority on this. And I am not right or wrong. These are Matt's opinions, as they are on all of my videos, except for the first binding. That book sucks. But in general, for the 99.9% of other books that I've reviewed, including this one, these are my opinions, and you're probably going to disagree with them. And more power to you. I am happy for you if you disagree with me, because that means you had fun reading. And I never want you to be unhappy reading. I don't want to be unhappy reading. I want the best for you. So read this book. Hope you enjoy this book. And remember that you're probably going to like it. And just take everything I said with an enormous grain of salt. So hopefully I don't taint your opinions on this going into it, but I just want to be honest about what my opinions were. So I'm going to leave off this very depressing video here, onwards and upwards to books that I will enjoy more than this one. And I hope you got some enjoyment out of this, out of my pain here. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, Brian, CJ, Darren, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Anna, Andra, Angelo, Ben, Blair, Brock, Evan, Jen B, Harry B, Jamie, Jeff Pixler, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion.